All Harold Lloyd's films were about the need to succeed. The Freshman was Lloyd's most successful comedy.
He had tremendous energy. He was a perfectionist. He really wanted to he had to excel in everything.
The last moments of the game, the last moments of the film. Harold is a college boy, desperate to prove himself a hero. "20 years later, the end of The Freshman became the start of Lloyd's last film. And at 53, he could still play the college boy.
Harold Lloyd was one of these guys, we all know somebody like this, who, when he gets older, seems young.
I want to see you. What? I want to see you as soon as you get through college.
He never grew up, did he? He was a kind of a Peter Pan.
Who are you? I didn't quite catch the name. I may not look just like it, but I have opportunity. Oh.
In his last years, Lloyd helped to bring up his granddaughter, Suzanne.
I actually called him Daddy. He wanted to be a grandfather, but didn't want to hear I'm a grandfather. I mean, youth. Still meant a lot to him.
The presence of young people and young ideas meant a lot too in his later life. One of his closest friends was Rich Carell, son of Charles Carell of Amos and Andy radio fame, now a film director himself.
People used to say to me, well, what's Harold Lloyd really like? I always thought he was a lot like the character in the films because he, even at an older age, was very youthful, pretty high speed most of the time, had a great sense of humor, and was always up to something. Was always up to a joke, or always up to pulling a trick on somebody. And he was a lot like the guy in the movies.
It's the rush hour. No seat for Harold's girl. Lloyd kept control of all the films he made, but in his vault they were in a state of disarray.
And when we were in the vault, we said, look, would you mind terribly if Dave and I put this back in order for you? So the negatives are in one vault, and the prints are in another, and the nitrate's in a safe place away from the rest of it. And he said not only would he not mind, but he would pay us to do that, which was unbelievable. It was a great gift. We couldn't believe it. And then in the course of it, we would start to screen the pictures, and he would attend the screenings, and he'd say, you see, that's the thing. That's where we did this, and that's where we did that.
Their enthusiasm delighted Lloyd, who feared people had lost interest in his films.
In the original days, the name Harold Lloyd brought lots of people into the theater, and they expected a quality product and got it. But later on, when those films sat in a vault for 30, 40 years, and People didn't know who they were. He was nervous about how the films would be accepted.
So nervous that he allowed the films out only for special occasions, like the opening by Princess Alexandra of Cinema City in London in 1970. Lloyd needn't have worried. New audiences were always captivated by his work from the silent days, not only by the comedy, but by the filmmaking skill of scenes like this. In the peaceful Isle of Paradiso, revolution is fomented by a renegade American. Oblivious to all this is Harold, a rich American tourist. I Worry was Lloyd's last picture for Hal Roach. Roach was producing a series of children's comedies called Our Gang, and Lloyd made this cameo appearance on the set of Why Worry as a favour to his old friend. They'd started together in Hollywood 8 years before. But Roach was now too busy with series like Our Gang to devote much time to Lloyd. With Lloyd virtually running his own affairs, they decided to part, as Lloyd himself recalled.
It was the nicest separating it could possibly have been. The relationship was splendid.
The separation from Roach was preceded by a wedding to his leading lady, Mildred Davis. They were married in 1923, and Mildred retired from the screen. The new leading lady was Jobina Ralston, who'd play in 6 Lloyd features. In their second film together, she's about to marry the wrong man, a man Harold knows is a bigamist. Harold is desperate to stop the wedding.
Well, The Girl Shy Chase was the heart of the entire picture. Harold decided to make that film based on the chase, and he was very, very proud of it.
In most of his films, Harold has a handicap. In Girl Shy, it's a crippling stutter. Harold commandeers anything that moves.
He was doing a bit on the back of a fire engine that was running away, and he was trying to get to the wedding and trying to go on the back of a fire engine at this point, and he started to grab the end of a hose that came loose in his hands, and so he was pulling and pulling and pulling.
It had a big brass coupling on it, so it came loose and hit me in the forehead, and down I went rolling on the pavement and out for probably about 5 minutes. Somebody asked me if it was all right after. I said I could have got along without it, but...
So they patched up his head, which had a big bump on it, and they went right back to shooting. And they went back to shooting the same gag.
Lloyd lavished his resources on this, his first independent production.
Harold did a lot of it himself. Hanging off the streetcar was really Harold. When it came to the buckboard with the horses running, well, most of that was done by a rodeo stunt driver who was real good with horses. Again, you know, the insurance company was saying, well, you can do some of this stuff, Harold, but not all of it. And so he didn't want to be foolish because he was producing the pictures. But he did a lot of it.
Working on the streets of Los Angeles was a challenge to Lloyd's filmmaking skill. He and his team devised a mobile tower for high angles. And to achieve a dramatic low angle, the cameraman was placed in a manhole on Grand Avenue, concealed by this box, which you can see in the master shot. Lloyd's chase was a strong influence on the chariot race in Ben-Hur the following year. A famous film of the 60s had a similar scene.
If you look at the end of The Graduate, it's not exactly a carbon copy as far as the gags that are involved, because The Graduate wasn't a gags picture, but it's real close.
Shortly after Girl Shy was released, Lloyd's first child, Gloria, was born.
When he came home, the whole place was just bedlam. You could hear his voice. He just loved to shout out, and we'd all come running, and his work was behind him.
Portrayed in the press as the ideal family, the Lloyds were envied by the rest of Hollywood. These home movies, however, were never seen in public. Even the Lloyd studio was a family concern. He'd long worked with his brother. His father was vice president. Now he brought in his uncle as controller of finance as the money rolled in. Comedies took on a more expensive look, better photographed, better staged than almost anyone's. And the action was always a reflection of the time, a chronicle of the roaring 20s. Harold plays a man so rich, he's already bought his second car of the day. There was no script on Lloyd films. The scenes were developed by gag men, like Sam Taylor, who was also Lloyd's most talented director. The process of creating gags was arduous. A friend of Lloyd's once sat in on a discussion in the gag room.
And this went on for hours, a whole day, and maybe 2 minutes of screen time out of this whole day. It was like being in a morgue. No one laughed and no one carried on, and then he rejected this and accepted this. I said, when does this ever stop? How do you make a picture this way? And that's the way it went. It was no fun, except when you saw it on the screen. Then it was wonderful.
A local thug finds his gang singing hymns in a mission and sets out to beat up the man responsible. Harold has seen the light, even if he sees little else.
He spent many, many hours, much like Stan Laurel did, in the editing room. He certainly was a guy that knew that if he didn't have something the first time, that he had enough time to go back and get it, that he had pictures that were budgeted high enough to spend money on previewing, and I think that he was a consummate filmmaker.
As a contrast to his films of city life, Lloyd set out to make a rural idyll, in the style of his great success, Grandma's Boy. It's love at first sight. To take the scene into another dimension, Lloyd had his cameraman, Walter Lundin, mount the camera on a special elevator. The climax was a vicious fight in the hold of a ship. The kid brother proves himself, as in Grandma's Boy, but Lloyd played it with a ruthlessness he'd never shown before. This quality was apparent in the way he drove himself in everything he did.
He's a very heavy competitor. We could never play games if he didn't win. And he would call you on the phone if you beat him in a squash game. Matter of fact, he sent me telegrams when I was at Berkeley, at the university, because I beat him over Christmas vacation in a squash game. And so he was going to persist, I was going to have to come down there and play him until he won.
He hated losing. Ooh. He wanted to be the winner. Even in a game of canasta, he had to win. And a lot of people that played with him didn't want to play with him because they just, they wanted their chance too. So, but that was one thing that I didn't like about his attitude, was the winning.
Lloyd had been winning throughout the 20s. His pictures earned colossal sums, and he sank more and more into them. For Speedy, he embarked on rebuilding New York City on his backlot. Determined to build the biggest and most impressive home in Hollywood, he'd already invested his rocketing income in Beverly Hills real estate. His success seemed unstoppable.
The promotion on Speedy, it was like it was announcing the second coming. I mean, it was so hysterical. And now, of course, this was Paramount, putting a heavy budget back, but it was worth it for them always. And Lloyd always did make more money, and certainly than Keaton, and more than Chaplin if you put it on a per year basis.
By 1928, Lloyd had made 11 comedy features against Chaplin's 3. He was in his mid-30s, a glittering future before him, yet Speedy was nostalgic for the old ways. The last horse car in New York is under threat from a big corporation. Harold has to help his girlfriend's grandfather keep it running, at least once every 24 hours. Not content with rebuilding New York and California, Lloyd took his company to Manhattan for the main exteriors. The city was thrown open to him for a sequence intended to top even the chase in Girl Shy. Gangsters have stolen the streetcar. Harold must get it back before the time limit runs out. No filmmaker had made such flamboyant use of New York City. But location shooting had its perils.
But what happened is they were shooting in sequence, as they did when they made a lot of those films. And once everyone saw this crash, and that the driver had been shaken up but not killed, and that the horses seemed to be all right, and they had this spectacular piece of film, Harold said, "This is great, I've got to use this." And what we'll do is we'll set a camera up, I'll get off stage, you pull me, and I'll land and roll. Everyone got together and they actually rewrote for that bit right on the spot.
The deadline is almost up. The gangsters, in a last desperate attempt, set a trap for the horse car. Harold is a local hero, champion of the old traditions. But the old tradition in the movies had already been shattered. The greatest threat to the style which Lloyd had perfected. He decided to meet the challenge head on.
I beg your pardon, sir.
Oh, that's perfectly all right. Isn't that a remarkable specimen of the dianthus coreopsis?
A silent gag with sound. Lloyd had almost completed Welcome Danger as a silent when he passed a theatre and heard shrieks of laughter.
And he walked into a newsreel, a sound newsreel of just things happening on the screen, of bacon frying, of a man working with an anvil, of someone starting a crank on an old Model T Ford. And the sounds of these things coming over the loudspeakers put everybody into fits of laughter. This was actually during the production of the silent version of Welcome Danger, and at that point he said, stop, we have to make a sound picture, because if the sounds can get that much laughs, then who knows, you know, the sky's the limit.
Reshooting for sound pushed the budget close to $1 million. Besides sound effects, there were sound jokes.
Newberry. Well, I've heard of raspberry and strawberry, but this is a new berry on me.
Lloyd confidently planned a preview for New York exhibitors.
The running was very bad. The film broke in several cases, and I had to go in the projection room and sync it up. It was a nightmare, all of it.
Chief, where are you? You're on the stairs.
Lloyd made a joke at the expense of the new talkies. Lots of sound, no picture.
Wait, light a match. I can't find the next step.
Hey, watch yourself. Look out.
Oh, my! Oh, hey, stop shaking it.
Don't be nervous, Chief.
Will somebody
The film was a failure in every way except financial. Out of curiosity, audiences flocked to hear Lloyd talking. He felt convinced he'd found the right formula. In his next film, by reworking the climb from Safety Last in sound, Lloyd thought he'd consolidate his success with talkies. But Feet First, released into the Depression, showed a severe box office drop for the first time in his career.
You have been listening to the Hardwood, that enchanted town. Here is the place where adventure came.
It was 2 years before Lloyd felt ready to try again.
The script was written by a quite eminent American playwright, Vincent Lawrence. Harold began to feel when talking films came in that he should have a proper script with well-written dialogue.
Harold is a movie hopeful. In this scene, a screen test, He parodies the acting of many early talkies.
Darling.
Oh, my precious, my sweetheart.
The bag. What are you packing the bag for?
I'm leaving you, dear.
You're what?
This is the last time we'll ever see each other.
Harold.
Oh, my dear, don't you understand? I'm doing it for your sake. The market has crashed and dragged me down with it. I've lost everything, even you.
I'll live with you in a tent.
I couldn't bear to see you suffer.
I'll wade through the mud and love it.
Oh, Marjorie.
I want nothing but you.
Oh, Marjorie.
You're my life.
Oh, Marjorie.
Oh, say you love me, say it.
I do love you, Marjorie. I do love you. I 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 love you.
I don't know where they pick guys up like this.
Harold falls for a blonde actress played by Constance Cummings.
I want you to always be as you are with me. I couldn't love you if you played with other girls. You wouldn't be that different fellow.
In Makeup as a Mexican Girl, she'd also aroused his interest by accident. Not realizing the two girls are the same, Harold is involved in an intricate comedy of errors.
Not only was he full of ideas about what he was going to actually do in the scene, but he was a man with a devastating sense of humor, and he loved practical jokes.
Would you like to dance with me?
Why, I'd love to.
Harold is trying to impress a producer's wife, but he's accidentally exchanged coats with a magician.
Oh, heaven! Oh, it was a bird. That's all right.
Lloyd was a master at the comedy of embarrassment.
Is the other strap all right?
The idea of serving a salad of this kind without sliced egg is perfectly absurd.
I'm very sorry, madam. I'll have it fixed in a second.
We did not do a lot of takes. For instance, in the big party scene where there was so much chaos and mayhem and there were rabbits and mice and everything running around the place, that was all rehearsed. And then it was just shot once or twice.
Oh, there it goes again.
At last, Lloyd felt he had a successful blend of sight gags and dialogue.
Personally, I think that was his best picture. And that's where his decline started with Movie Crazy, because that picture didn't do well at the box office, did a lot less money at the box office than earlier pictures. Then he must have felt it was pretty hopeless.
Convinced the picture was a hit, he went on a tour of Europe. He visited Ashenden coal mine in the north of England, where his mother's ancestors had come from.
This coal we got down in the very depth of the mine. Is that right? That's right. And I can assure you that I'm going to put that in our archives and treasure it always.
When he realized the film had flopped, he was shattered. He consoled himself with his estate and his family. He now had an adopted daughter, Peggy, and a son, Harold Jr.
Hey, listen, what kind of an actor is your daddy?
Well, he was extremely affectionate to his children. He gave them practically everything they wanted, something he never had. Maybe he overcompensated because of that.
He made these talking home movies for his family's benefit.
Give it to him. The old tin type. Come on.
There's the old tin type.
Get the old tin type. Napoleon. Come on, sir.
He was really a fun father. He was a strict father, a Victorian father in many ways, but lots of fun.
Wait.
Here Lloyd clowns with his father, Foxy.
Can I smoke this for you?
Well, you're liable to get the effects, of course.
Behind the charm lay the inevitable tensions.
Oh, listen. All right, get out of here.
Harold's weakness, something that very few people knew. One was he had a violent temper, for which he was extremely sorry about afterwards. It would do anything to make up for it.
He had a pretty hot temper. He really did. And when he got mad, I mean, especially with us as children, he'd chase us around the house. We'd go under beds. We'd go in closets. And, I mean, he wanted his way. You know, he thought we hadn't behaved.
I never saw him blow it up on the studio.
His output slowed to one film every 2 years. In the cast of The Milky Way was Lionel Stander.
Now what?
That's all, I quit.
And he chose as director a veteran of silent comedy, Leo McCarey.
McCarey had a peculiar fixation. He had to have a piano on the set because in between scenes when he wanted to be inspired, he'd play the piano.
For Lloyd, it was like the old days.
Well, Leo belongs to my school, and we don't stick to the script.
One scene required Harold to smuggle a colt into a taxicab.
That whole scene was completely ad-libbed. We didn't have it in the script at all, and when we got there to shoot it, we didn't know what it was going to do. So Leo says, Harold, now we got the colt in there, you work the colt. And the funny part is, we expected to put the neighs of the horse in afterwards. Leo McCarey did the whinnying of the horse, but did it so well and so on point that instead of redubbing that, we kept Leo's whinnies in there, and they're in there today, and no one knows the difference.
Once again, the critics raved, but the public stayed away.
Things started to taper off for him because he began to lose more control. The head of the studio had input on it, the executive in charge of production had input on it, the writing staffs and other people would come in to do rewrites, and it got to the point where he felt like he didn't need the grief anymore.
Not even the golf course on his estate could compensate.
For an actor not to be active in his profession, it's like a golfer that hasn't played golf for a year or so. You get very rusty.
Lloyd with Chaplin and Douglas Fairbanks, his two greatest influences. Of all the silent stars, he had succeeded best with sound, but he was defeated by something else, the Depression. His character's pursuit of success, once so appealing, was no longer fashionable in the 30s. However hard he tried, audiences failed to respond. His sixth talkie lost more heavily than ever.
And I was terribly disappointed in it. After it was released, I said to the boys, I am not going to start on another picture until we get an idea that I think has real merit behind it. And I looked for about 6 months very diligently, and I didn't come up with what I considered was a good idea. And then I got doing something else, and after I'd stayed off the screen for about 2 years, I stopped looking, and a lot of people wondered why I had more or less stopped making pictures. That was really behind it. It wasn't that you just decided to quit, you just kind of tapered off, is all.
Even buried in his hobbies, Lloyd had to excel, as in every other field. He studied microscopy. He took up abstract painting and made a study of the science of color. He won awards as a stereo photographer. He took these shots of Marilyn Monroe. His film career seemed over. But Lloyd still had fans. One was director Preston Sturges. He had never forgotten The Freshman. He wanted to use it in his new film, a tribute to Lloyd's career. He wanted Lloyd to star, an opportunity impossible to miss.
I want to see you. What? I want to see you as soon as you get through college.
For Lloyd regarded Sturges as the industry's most brilliant comedy director. With finance from Howard Hughes, success seemed assured. Harold played the character from The Freshman. What might have happened to him 20 years on? The answer was disillusion, both for the character and Lloyd himself.
Diddle Doc. Yes, William. The boss would like to see you.
Oh, me? Oh. Right away.
The character would fight his way out of it in the best Lloyd tradition. But Lloyd found himself trapped.
Preston took about 3 to 4 months to write the first third of it. The last 2/3 he wrote in a week, or less.
I hope we're not intruding.
We didn't get along from that point on because we didn't see eye to eye with it.
On top of this, the film had problems Lloyd had never met before.
Harold had said, I'm not used to working with a lion. I won't rehearse with him, but I'll do the scene with him. And he did. One scene when they got into one of the banker's offices. Jackie gets up with his paws on the desk. The ears of the lion are right next to where Harold is standing. Harold begins to talk to this banker.
I will make you popular overnight and for nothing. There's only one circus in the world for sale. Why, Jackie? I have it.
Well, Harold just stepped back and said, I will do no more close-ups with Jackie.
This was Francis Ramsden's first film. Lloyd had made nearly 200. Yet it all seemed new to him.
It's all paid for.
He learned reams of dialogue, played the scenes with great skill, but what had started with such promise had become an unhappy chore.
The engagement ring. You can take that excuse away from him anyway, and... well...
I think he was at times ill at ease, is the word to use, with it. But he went along with it. After all, he'd okayed the script. I mean, he wanted to do it, and that was part of the deal, wasn't it?
He'd stay up, I could hear him, the door was shut, I could hear him going on for hours, learning this dialogue. So I think he got into something a little over his head that he didn't expect to get into.
And I think this is what Harold began to show in the picture. He wasn't his happy self as the picture went on.
Why, it seems like yesterday to me. I mean that I started here.
Well, it was quite a few yesterdays ago. The earth has cooled considerably since you put on your first pair of sleeve protectors outside there.
Yes, I guess it has.
And so have you, Harold. So have you.
I had a section in my contract that if I didn't like it, that I could play it the way I wanted. But I also had to do it the way he wanted. That meant in the projection room, we had to argue it out. And we didn't fare any better in the projection room than we had on the set.
Because and now we have Mr. Lloyd's preference. We will print these, we will show his preference. And Harold would say, you see, Preston, I mean, they were like little rotten kids.
So here were two opposed things. And Harold would say, look, here's a wonderful gag I worked last night, and let's put it in. So, well, kill my dialogue. And Lloyd would say, well, which is more important, your dialogue or a good picture?
Sturges had written a typical Lloyd high and dizzy sequence, but he shot it in the studio, and the special effects lacked the realism of Lloyd's original routines. Howard Hughes pulled the film from release, took 3 years to recut it, changed the title, and diminished the name of Harold Lloyd until it all but disappeared. A sad ending to a great career. Lloyd embarked with his usual energy on a new career as Imperial Potentate of the Shrine, a Masonic group fundraising for hospitals for crippled children. In the 1950s, he received an honorary Oscar to a master comedian and good citizen, and an award from Eastman House presented by Jesse Lasky. And he helped the careers of young actors like Jack Lemmon.
One of the biggest thrills of my life, really, was there was a function, and he got up and said,
Somebody got the brilliant idea. I needed like a hole in my head to do a life story of mine, and they said, "Who would you like to have in it?" And right off the reel, I said, "If you can get Jack Lemmon, he's the man for me."
I was floored, but I was scared to death. Now, it never did happen, so we'll never know, will we? And in a sense, I'm very relieved. I think that there is nothing in the world tougher. In looking back on it, I'll tell you the truth, I'm just as glad I never did it. With all my love and respect for Harold and everything else, I think the onus of trying to recapture someone who was famous because they were unique and alone and up there all by themselves. I don't want to do Chaplin. I don't want to do Keaton. I don't want to do Harold. Forget it.
In 1962, Lloyd compiled some of his films into the world of comedy and took it to the Cannes Film Festival, where he received a standing ovation and yet another award.
He was on top of the world, and he thought that he had been reintroduced to the world as a great comedian. And that led him to produce The Funny Side of Life, which was a critical bomb, and he could not handle that. He was totally involved with his films. He thought they were, if not the greatest films ever made, some of the greatest films ever made. And he could not understand why the public would not like them. And he pulled Funny Side of Life off the market.
What Harold really wanted was people to accept him, younger audiences, to accept him and his work from the older days. Nothing was more exciting for him than attending a screening of a film that, for instance, a high school or a college audience got really excited about.
It was incredible. I mean, they packed the rafters of this theater. I mean, kids were standing out in freezing snow to get in, and the whole theater went up in arms. I mean, I've never seen anybody react to the films like that.
How can you escape feeling good when you discover that the new generations are responding so actively to what you've been doing all these years ago?
And it encouraged him then to go on to UCLA and USC and show the films more extensively to students. I think it really spurred him on, and that he really knew there was a young audience out there who'd never seen his work and didn't have any, ideas of who is this. They weren't sure who they were going to see, so he had a clean palette to really start painting his picture on again.
This new audience was usually amazed as well as amused. Harold is taking his family for a run in his new car, but his new car has run into one difficulty after another. By the end of the 60s, Lloyd was still reluctant to retire. His wife Mildred had died, and he was resigned to the loss of the huge audience of the old days. But he had many visitors and took pride in showing them his estate, modelled after the Villa d'Este in Rome.
The beauty of those grounds is absolutely breathtaking. The way the waterfall fell right to the canyon floor and the canoe run, and it was a fairyland. And it was an expression certainly of a man with a great childlike streak. But it was wonderfully carried off. I think the house was a major, major achievement in his life, and I think I have a strange feeling that it meant that to him. Otherwise, why hold on to it? Why never change anything? That did fascinate me, because you'd see a chair that would be, a little worn and that, and he seemed to have a pride in the fact that it was an original. I respected that. I admired that about him.
Lloyd fell ill in 1971 at the age of 77.
When he was determined terminally ill, actually, with cancer, he was very unwilling to accept that. He said, I have to fight it. There must be another way around it. Almost again, like the screen character, he wanted to see if he could, kind of outsmart his way out of it, I guess. And when it was determined that he couldn't, the doctor said, look, Harold, you have to get your affairs in order, and you're not going to live. You're only going to live for perhaps another half a year. And he gave up. When he knew there was no chance and that the fight was over, he just gave up, and he went to bed and died in about 3.5 weeks. So once he gave up, he gave up. He didn't want to linger. I never knew him as someone who was sick or feeble or slow or senile or unable to get around. And when he was faced with the prospect of being somebody like that, he just talked himself into not getting into that position. And that's how he died. In bed, at home, which is probably the way he always wanted to go.
He loved life. He loved life. I think he could have lived for 200 years and still found many interests. He had that desire to learn and to enjoy, which I think is I love that quality in people. And I love that in him. I did.
Lloyd was justly proud of his career. He knew his films were as perfect as he could make them. Almost.
I think we would have almost been better if we could have really have followed the camera on up and let it, you see it go way up into height and then just gradually kind of circled on down, and the last thing you saw them still going on up, still not giving a damn. Would have been a wonderful fade out. Would have beaten this. It's too bad. I better go back and make it over.